A racist businessman spat in the face of a decorated black honor guard at Arlington National Cemetery. The crowd watched in horror as silence gripped the sacred grounds. What happened next left the attacker wishing he had never stepped foot on hallowed ground. The autumn wind whispered through the endless rows of white marble headstones at Arlington National Cemetery. Visitors stood in hushed reverence, watching the precision and dignity of the honor guard ceremony at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Staff Sergeant David Thompson stood at his post, his uniform immaculate, his bearing perfect, just as it had been every day for the past 3 years as one of the few black sentinels chosen to guard this sacred space. The morning had started like any other. Tourist groups moved quietly through the grounds, many wiping tears as they witnessed the changing of the guard. Children asked questions in whispered voices, learning about sacrifice and honor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The atmosphere was solemn, peaceful, until Richard Barrett changed everything. Barrett, a wealthy real estate developer known for his controversial views, had been watching Thompson for nearly an hour. His face twisted with barely contained contempt as he observed the honor guard ceremony. "This isn't right," he muttered to his associate. "They're destroying everything these heroes died for." Several nearby visitors shot him disapproving glances, but Barrett didn't care. The tension built as Barrett moved closer to the ceremonial walkway. His expensive suit and confident stride spoke of someone used to getting his way, someone who believed money made him untouchable. The other visitors sensed something was wrong, but none expected what happened next. As Thompson executed his precise movements, Barrett suddenly stepped forward, breaking the invisible barrier between spectator and sacred space. Before anyone could react, he closed the distance to Thompson's position. The guard remained stoic, trained to maintain his bearing despite any disruption. Then Barrett did the unthinkable. He spat directly in Thompson's face. The sound of the spittle hitting Thompson's cheek echoed in the stunned silence. A child gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The other visitors stood frozen, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Barrett's face twisted into a smug grin, clearly expecting, perhaps even hoping for, a violent reaction. But Staff Sergeant David Thompson didn't move. The spittle ran down his dark skin, dripping onto his perfectly pressed uniform. But his expression never changed. His eyes remained fixed forward, his posture unwavering. The discipline of a United States Marine, honed through multiple combat tours before joining the honor guard, held firm. Barrett's grin began to falter as he realized his attempt to provoke Thompson had failed. "What's wrong?" he taunted, his voice breaking the sacred silence. "Too afraid to do anything about it?" The crowd watched in tense anticipation. Some had pulled out their phones, recording the confrontation. Others looked around desperately for security. A veteran in a wheelchair wearing a Vietnam War cap began to move forward, his weathered face dark with anger. Thompson's hand moved slightly, touching the ceremonial rifle he carried. The crowd held its collective breath. Barrett flinched, taking a half step back despite his bravado, but Thompson simply adjusted his grip, maintaining his pose with perfect precision. Then, from behind Thompson, heavy footsteps approached. Captain Michael Rivera, the guard commander, emerged with 2 military police officers. His face was a mask of controlled fury as he surveyed the scene. The spit still visible on Thompson's cheek told him everything he needed to know. "Sir," Rivera's voice cut through the tension like a knife, "you have just committed a federal offense by assaulting a member of the honor guard and desecrating a national monument. These officers will take you into custody." Barrett's smug expression crumbled. "You can't arrest me," he sputtered. "Do you know who I am? I'll have your job for this." "Who you are," Rivera replied coldly, "is someone who just committed a serious crime on hallowed ground. The only place you're going is to federal detention." As the officers moved to arrest Barrett, he began to struggle, his composed facade crumbling completely. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "He shouldn't even be allowed to wear that uniform." The veteran in the wheelchair spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen real combat. "Son, that man you just disrespected has more honor in his little finger than you'll have in your entire life." The crowd erupted in applause as Barrett was led away, his face now red with humiliation rather than arrogance. Throughout it all, Thompson maintained his post, never breaking his bearing, never giving Barrett the satisfaction of a reaction. But this was only the beginning. What no one knew that morning was that Barrett's action would trigger a chain of events that would test not just Thompson's discipline, but the very foundations of honor, duty, and justice in ways no one could have predicted. Earlier that morning, Staff Sergeant David Thompson had prepared for his shift like any other day. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, he stood before the mirror in the honor guard quarters, meticulously adjusting every detail of his uniform. His movements were practiced, precise, the result of years of discipline and dedication. The weight of the ceremonial rifle against his shoulder felt familiar, grounding him in the solemn duty ahead. Thompson's journey to the honor guard had been anything but typical. Growing up in Detroit's tough East Side, he'd watched his single mother work 3 jobs to keep food on the table. The local VA hospital where she cleaned floors had been his first exposure to veterans, their stories of sacrifice and brotherhood planting seeds that would shape his future. At 18, against his mother's wishes but with her tearful blessing, he'd found his calling in the Marine Corps. 3 combat tours in Afghanistan followed, where he earned 2 Purple Hearts and the Bronze Star for pulling 2 fellow Marines to safety during an ambush. The scars on his left shoulder still ached in cold weather, a permanent reminder of the rounds he'd taken during the rescue. But it was his selection to the honor guard that filled him with the most pride, a position he'd earned through unwavering dedication and exceptional service. "You're different," his commanding officer had told him during the selection process. "We need guards who understand that this isn't just about standing watch. It's about representing everything these fallen heroes died to protect." Thompson had become only the 5th Black Sentinel in the Honor Guard's history, a fact that earned him both respect and unwanted attention. In the guard quarters, Thompson's friend and fellow Sentinel, Marcus Rodriguez, was also preparing for his shift. Rodriguez, a second-generation Mexican-American from Texas, had served with Thompson in Afghanistan. Their shared experience of breaking barriers in the military had forged a deep brotherhood between them. "Hey, David," Rodriguez called out, adjusting his own uniform. "Did you see the latest comments on that military forum? Some people still can't handle having you here. They're saying the same garbage about me, too, that we're changing the face of the guard." Thompson continued adjusting his uniform, his expression unchanged in the mirror. "Can't control what other people think, Marcus. Can only control how I conduct myself. My father used to say dignity speaks louder than anger." "That's why you're better than me, brother," Rodriguez replied, shaking his head. "I'd have knocked someone out by now. Remember that visitor last month? The one who asked for a real guard member to explain the ceremony?" "I remember," Thompson said, a slight smile crossing his face. "I also remember how you stepped in and gave him the most professional tour of his life. That's how we win. Excellence in the face of ignorance." The truth was, Thompson had faced resistance from the moment he joined the Honor Guard. Anonymous letters appeared in his locker suggesting he was disrespecting tradition. Online forums questioned his selection, claiming standards had been lowered. Some visitors had even complained to the cemetery administration, demanding to know why traditional guards were being replaced. His wife, Maria, a trauma nurse at Walter Reed Military Hospital, worried about the toll it took on him. She'd seen firsthand how the weight of constant scrutiny could wear down even the strongest spirits. That morning, as they shared their usual pre-dawn coffee, she'd noticed the tension in his shoulders. "You don't have to prove anything to these people, David," she'd told him, her hand gentle on his arm. "You've earned your place here. The other nurses tell me how proud their veteran patients are when they see you standing guard. You're changing perceptions one day at a time." "It's not about proving anything," he'd responded, kissing her goodbye. "It's about honoring the legacy of everyone who rests here. Their sacrifice didn't see color. Neither should we." Before leaving, he'd hugged their sleeping 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, who dreamed of following in her father's footsteps someday. As Thompson had walked through Arlington's grounds that morning, he'd passed the graves of black soldiers who'd served in segregated units during World War II. He often stopped to pay his respects, drawing strength from their legacy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Their stories were part of why he served, a living testament to how far the nation had come, and a reminder of how far it still had to go. What Thompson didn't know was that Richard Barrett had been planning this confrontation for weeks. Barrett, a third-generation real estate magnate, had built his empire on controversial developments and questionable practices. His private views, usually carefully hidden behind a veneer of corporate respectability, had recently begun leaking into public view after a series of leaked emails exposed his correspondence with various extremist groups. Barrett had first noticed Thompson during a memorial service 3 weeks earlier. The sight of a black man in the honor guard's prestigious uniform had gnawed at him, challenging everything he believed about traditional values and maintaining standards. He'd made calls, trying to find dirt on Thompson's record. When that failed, he'd taken to social media under various aliases, attempting to stir up controversy about changing traditions at Arlington. But Thompson's record was impeccable. His fellow guards respected him. The veteran community admired him. Even Barrett's attempts to undermine Thompson through official channels had failed, leading to this morning's desperate attempt to provoke a reaction, a plan he'd boasted about in private messages to his inner circle. Captain Rivera, a 20-year veteran who'd risen through the ranks to become guard commander, had watched Barrett's earlier visits with growing concern. He'd seen the pattern before, people who couldn't accept change, looking to create incidents they could exploit. He'd instructed his teams to be vigilant but hadn't expected such a brazen attack. Now, as Barrett was being processed by military police, Rivera approached Thompson during a brief break between ceremonies. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds, and a cool breeze carried the sound of distant taps. "How are you holding up, Staff Sergeant?" Rivera asked, his concern evident beneath his professional demeanor. "Fine, sir," Thompson replied, his voice steady. "Ready to continue my duties." Rivera nodded, understanding the strength behind those simple words. "What Barrett did wasn't just an attack on you. It was an attack on everything this place represents. He'll face serious consequences." What neither of them realized was that Barrett's actions were about to spark a much larger conflict. In his pocket, Barrett's phone was already buzzing with messages from his network of influential friends, people who shared his views and had the power to act on them. By sundown, what had begun as one man's hateful act would evolve into something far more dangerous. Thompson resumed his post, the morning sun glinting off the marble headstones stretching endlessly in every direction. Each one represented a story, a sacrifice, a piece of American history. He'd sworn to honor them all, regardless of the cost. That dedication was about to be tested in ways he never imagined. Richard Barrett sat in the holding cell at the military police station, his expensive suit now wrinkled, his carefully maintained facade crumbling. The reality of his situation was starting to sink in. Federal charges, potential prison time, his phone and laptop confiscated. But rather than remorse, his humiliation was transforming into something darker. Through the small window of his cell, he could see military police officers reviewing security footage of his attack on Thompson. Their disgusted expressions only fueled his anger. Barrett had spent his entire life believing his wealth made him untouchable. The Barrett family name adorned buildings across 3 states, and their real estate empire had weathered countless scandals before. "I want my phone call," Barrett demanded, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. The young MP barely glanced in his direction, continuing his paperwork. Barrett wasn't used to being ignored. "Do you know who I am?" he shouted, rising to his feet. "I'm Richard Barrett III. My family built half this city." Finally, an older officer approached. "Mr. Barrett, you'll get your call when processing is complete. Until then, I suggest you sit quietly and consider the seriousness of your actions on hallowed ground." Barrett sank back onto the metal bench, his mind racing. One call was all he needed. His network of influential friends included judges, politicians, and media figures who shared his traditional values. They had been watching Thompson's presence at Arlington with growing concern, seeing it as another example of what they called the degradation of American institutions. What the officers didn't know was that Barrett's attack hadn't been a spontaneous act of hatred. It was meant to be the spark that ignited something larger. His private organization, the Heritage Preservation Alliance, had been looking for the right moment to take their fight public. Barrett smiled slightly, knowing that by now the video of his confrontation with Thompson would be spreading across social media, carefully edited to serve their narrative. Meanwhile, across town in his palatial Potomac mansion, Senator James Winchester watched the unedited footage of Barrett's attack with growing concern. The senator, a key supporter of Barrett's organization, immediately recognized the potential fallout. He picked up his secure phone, dialing a familiar number. "We need to contain this," Winchester said when the call connected. "Barrett was supposed to be smarter than this. Get our media contacts to spin the narrative. Make it about changing traditions, not race, and find something, anything, we can use against Thompson." In his office at the Heritage Preservation Alliance headquarters, Executive Director Charles Whitmore was already coordinating their response. Whitmore, a former military intelligence officer, had spent years building a network of like-minded individuals in positions of power. Barrett's action threatened to expose their carefully constructed operation before they were ready. "Sir," his assistant interrupted, "the video's going viral. But our social media teams are already pushing the counter-narrative. Comments suggesting Thompson broke protocol, questions about lowered standards. It's gaining traction in certain circles." Whitmore nodded, studying the multiple screens displaying their social media operation. Dozens of seemingly unconnected accounts were pushing their message, creating a wave of manufactured outrage. "Good. Keep pushing. And get me everything you can on Thompson. Family, finances, service record. Find a weakness we can exploit." Back at the military police station, Barrett finally got his phone call. Instead of calling his lawyer, he dialed a private number known to only a select few. "It's done," he said when the call connected. "Phase 1 is complete." Thompson maintained his composure just as we predicted. Now the narrative writes itself. The angry black man who doesn't get angry. It makes him look weak, artificial, out of place. The voice on the other end was cold, calculating. "You took an unnecessary risk, Richard. This could have backfired spectacularly. But what's done is done. We'll accelerate the timeline. Expect increased chatter about traditional values and preserving history across all platforms. Our media contacts are already asking questions about the honor guard selection process." As Barrett hung up, a slight smile crossed his face. Let them think he had lost control, that this was just another rich man's racist outburst. They didn't understand that sometimes, to create the right story, you needed the perfect villain. His public humiliation would be worth it once their larger plan unfolded. In the coming hours, their well-oiled machine sprang into action. Conservative news outlets began running stories questioning the changing face of military traditions. Social media influencers shared carefully crafted messages about maintaining standards. Anonymous accounts spread false claims about Thompson's service record. But what Barrett and his allies didn't realize was that they weren't the only ones who knew how to fight in the shadows. Captain Rivera had spent 20 years in military intelligence before joining the Honor Guard. As he watched the coordinated media campaign unfold, patterns emerged that set off alarm bells from his previous life. "This is too organized," Rivera told his former colleague at the Pentagon, now a senior intelligence analyst. "The response is too coordinated. Someone's been planning this, waiting for the right moment. I need you to dig deeper. Something bigger is going on here." As night fell over Arlington, Thompson finished his shift, unaware that he had become the centerpiece of an orchestrated campaign to undermine everything he represented. His dedication to duty, his unwavering composure, the very qualities that made him an exemplary honor guard, were being twisted into weapons to use against him. The real battle was just beginning, and it would be fought not just at Arlington's gates but in the shadows of power where men like Barrett and his allies operated. Thompson's strength would be tested not only by open hatred, but by hidden forces working to destroy everything he had worked to achieve. The video of Barrett spitting on Thompson spread across social media like wildfire. By evening, major news networks were running the footage on repeat, their analysts dissecting every moment of the confrontation. Thompson's stoic response drew widespread praise, but beneath the surface, a more sinister narrative was taking shape. "Breaking tonight," announced Catherine Hayes on National News Network. "Controversy at Arlington National Cemetery, as a confrontation between a prominent businessman and an honor guard member, raises questions about changing traditions at our nation's most sacred military shrine. Some veterans groups are expressing concern about what they call political correctness infiltrating military institutions." Maria Thompson watched the coverage from the break room at Walter Reed Hospital, her hands clenched around her coffee cup. The straight news coverage was bad enough, but the comment sections beneath the online articles made her blood boil. Anonymous accounts questioned her husband's qualifications, spread lies about his service record, and suggested his selection was based on diversity quotas rather than merit. "Don't read that garbage," her colleague Sarah advised, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "They're just keyboard warriors who've never served a day in their lives." "It's not just random trolls," Maria replied, showing Sarah her phone. "Look at these accounts: retired military officers, political figures, even some veterans organizations. They're all pushing the same talking points, using the same phrases. This feels coordinated." At Arlington, Thompson maintained his watch, but the atmosphere had changed. More visitors were filming him, some openly hostile. One man approached the barrier, wearing a veteran's cap. "My father is buried here," he called out. "He'd be rolling in his grave seeing what they've done to this place." Rodriguez, standing watch nearby, felt his jaw clench. He'd seen the social media storm brewing, the carefully crafted hashtags: "Restore Honor Guard Tradition," "Keep Arlington Pure," "Stand with Barrett." Each one seemed to emerge simultaneously across multiple platforms, amplified by accounts with large followings. Captain Rivera was noticing the same patterns. In his office, he studied the growing online movement with growing concern. His intelligence background helped him spot the telltale signs of a coordinated information operation. The narratives were too polished, the timing too perfect. "Sir," Lieutenant Chen from Cybersecurity interrupted his analysis, "you need to see this." She placed a tablet on his desk, displaying a seemingly innocuous website for the Heritage Preservation Alliance. "We've traced significant bot activity to servers registered to this organization. They're amplifying specific messages about Thompson and the Honor Guard." Rivera leaned forward, studying the organization's leadership page. He recognized several names: former military officers, politicians, business leaders. Barrett's name appeared on the board of directors. "This goes deeper than we thought," he muttered. "Get me everything you can on their activities over the past 6 months." Meanwhile, Barrett had been released on bail, his family connections ensuring preferential treatment despite the federal charges. He emerged from the military police station to find a crowd of supporters waiting, along with carefully positioned news cameras. "This was never about race," Barrett declared, reading from a prepared statement. "This is about maintaining the sacred traditions of Arlington National Cemetery. The Honor Guard has always represented the best of American military tradition. Changes to those traditions, however well-intentioned, dishonor the heroes who rest here." The statement was immediately picked up by sympathetic news outlets and amplified across social media. Within hours, a protest was being organized for the following day. The organizers claimed it would be a peaceful demonstration by concerned veterans, but intelligence suggested professional agitators were being bussed in. At the Thompson home that evening, David sat with Maria at their kitchen table, his uniform jacket hanging nearby. "They're trying to make this bigger than just one incident," he said, reviewing the day's events on his laptop. "Barrett's attack was just the beginning." "I knew something felt off about all this," Maria replied. "The response is too organized. Even some of my patients are talking about it, repeating the same talking points I've seen online." Thompson's phone buzzed with a message from Rodriguez. "Check your email. You need to see this." Opening his inbox, Thompson found a link to a private forum where members of the Heritage Preservation Alliance discussed their long-term strategy. Someone on the inside had leaked screenshots. The messages revealed a calculated plan to use Thompson's presence in the honor guard as a wedge issue, part of a broader campaign to restore traditional values in military institutions. Barrett's attack was meant to test Thompson's reactions, gathering footage they could use later. These people have been watching me for months, Thompson realized, scanning the messages. Everything I do, every ceremony, every interaction, they've been waiting for something they could use. Maria moved behind him, reading over his shoulder. Her nurse's training helped her stay calm in crises, but this was different. These people weren't just attacking her husband's position. They were trying to destroy everything he represented. "David," she said softly, "this is bigger than just you now. They're using you as a symbol to attack every person of color who's broken barriers in the military. We need to be careful." Thompson nodded, closing his laptop. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he needed to focus on his family, his duty, and the oath he'd sworn to uphold. The honor guard had faced challenges before: segregation, discrimination, resistance to change. Each time they'd overcome through unwavering dedication to their sacred mission. As he prepared his uniform for the next day's shift, Thompson reflected on the words inscribed on the tomb of the unknown soldier. "Here rests in honored glory, an American soldier known but to God." Those words made no mention of race, creed, or color. Neither would he, no matter what storms were gathering. The Thompson family home had always been a sanctuary, a place where the weight of David's responsibilities could be temporarily set aside. But now, as he pulled into their driveway after his shift, something felt different. The familiar warmth of their modest colonial house was overshadowed by an unmarked police car parked across the street, a protective detail Captain Rivera had insisted on after the day's events. Inside, Maria was helping their daughter Sophie with homework at the kitchen table. The 5-year-old's face lit up when she saw her father. "Daddy, we saw you on TV!" she exclaimed, running to hug him. Thompson lifted her up, holding her tight, but his eyes met Maria's worried gaze over their daughter's shoulder. "Sophie, honey," Maria said gently, "why don't you go finish your math problems in your room? Daddy and I need to talk for a few minutes." The girl nodded, gathering her papers and skipping upstairs, unaware of the tension in her parents' faces. Once Sophie was out of earshot, Maria pulled out her phone. "It's getting worse, David. Look at this." She showed him a series of social media posts. Their home address had been leaked online, along with calls for peaceful protests outside their house. But the comments beneath were anything but peaceful. "We've had 3 calls at the hospital today," Maria continued, her voice tight. "People asking for my schedule, trying to find out when I work. The administration's increased security, but—" She trailed off, her professional composure cracking slightly. Thompson sat heavily at the kitchen table, still in his honor guard uniform. "I knew there would be pushback when I joined the guard," he said. "But this is different. They're not just coming after me anymore." His phone buzzed, a message from Rodriguez. "Check your inbox. They're organized." Thompson opened his email to find screenshots from various private groups. The Heritage Preservation Alliance was coordinating with other organizations, planning demonstrations not just at Arlington, but outside their home, at Maria's hospital, even at Sophie's school. "We should consider sending Sophie to stay with my sister in Baltimore," Maria suggested, reading over his shoulder. "Just until things calm down." Thompson shook his head. "If we send her away, they win. They want us scared, want us to change our lives. We can't give them that satisfaction." Even as he said it, though, his eyes drifted to the family photos on their wall. Sophie's first day of kindergarten, their last Christmas together, moments of peace that now felt threatened. The doorbell rang, making them both jump. Through the security camera they'd installed last month, they saw Captain Rivera standing on their porch, holding a thick folder. Thompson let him in, noting the captain's grim expression. "We've identified some of the key players," Rivera said without preamble, spreading documents across their kitchen table. "The Heritage Preservation Alliance is just the public face. Behind them, there's a network of wealthy donors, political operatives, and former military officers. They've been planning something like this for months, waiting for the right moment." The documents revealed a complex web of connections. Barrett's attack had been a catalyst, but the infrastructure for their campaign had been built long before. Bank records showed millions flowing through shell companies. Email chains revealed coordinated messaging strategies. Social media analyses demonstrated artificial amplification of specific narratives. "They're calling it Operation Restore," Rivera explained, pointing to a partially redacted document. "The goal isn't just to remove you from the honor guard. They want to use this to launch a broader campaign against what they call forced diversity in military institutions." Maria picked up one of the photos. Barrett meeting with Senator Winchester at a private club. "These people," she said, her voice tight with anger, "they've never served, never sacrificed, yet they think they can decide who's worthy of honoring our fallen?" "It's not about worth," Thompson replied, studying the documents. "It's about power. They're afraid of losing their grip on institutions they've always controlled." He paused, looking at a photo of protesters gathering outside Arlington's gates. "But they've made a mistake. They think I'll break, that I'll quit to protect my family. They don't understand what the honor guard really means." Sophie's voice drifted down from upstairs as she practiced reading aloud, a reminder of everything at stake. Thompson shared a look with Maria, seeing his own determination reflected in her eyes. They'd faced challenges before, when he was deployed, when she worked double shifts during COVID, when they were the first black family in their neighborhood. Each time, they'd grown stronger. "What's our next move?" Maria asked, her nurse's training kicking in. "Assess the situation, make a plan, take action." Rivera pulled out another document. "We've got friendly media contacts ready to expose their network, and some of their own members are having second thoughts. They're willing to talk, but it has to be handled carefully. These people have resources, influence." Thompson nodded, his mind already working through scenarios. "We don't just expose them," he said. "We show everyone what they're really fighting against. Every time I stand watch, every ceremony I perform, it reminds people what Arlington really represents. Not their version of tradition, but real American values." A notification popped up on Thompson's phone. Another message spreading their address. Another call for action. But now, instead of fear, he felt resolve. His family was strong. His duty was clear. And he wasn't alone in this fight. As Rivera left, Thompson and Maria stood in their doorway, watching the protective detail change shifts. The evening air was cool, carrying the distant sound of taps from Arlington. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight in their home, they were still standing strong. The morning sun had barely risen over Arlington when the first protesters appeared. They gathered at the cemetery's main entrance, carrying signs that read, "Preserve our traditions," and "Honor Guard standards matter." What began as a small group quickly swelled as buses arrived, unloading more demonstrators with professional-looking banners and matching T-shirts. Thompson watched from his post as the crowd grew. His trained eye noticed details others might miss: the military precision spacing of the protest leaders, the tactical radio earpieces some wore, the way certain individuals coordinated movements through hand signals. These weren't just concerned citizens. This was a carefully orchestrated operation. "Staff Sergeant," Captain Rivera's voice crackled in his earpiece. "We've got reports of similar protests forming at other entrances. Military police are en route, but maintain your post no matter what happens." Across the street, news vans were setting up, their cameras focused on both Thompson and the growing crowd. A reporter he recognized from National News Network was doing a live stand-up. "Behind me, protesters have gathered to express concerns about what they call the politicization of Arlington's sacred traditions. This follows yesterday's controversial incident involving Honor Guard member David Thompson." Suddenly, a familiar face emerged from the crowd. Richard Barrett, freshly released on bail, wearing an expensive suit and surrounded by what appeared to be private security. He approached the cemetery entrance, cameras following his every move. "I'm here to pay respects to my father," Barrett announced loudly, playing to the cameras. "Will I be prevented from honoring my family's military legacy because of politically motivated charges?" Thompson maintained his position, face forward, as Barrett walked past. But this time, Barrett didn't approach him directly. Instead, he made a show of laying flowers at a nearby grave while photographers captured every moment. It was theater, carefully staged for maximum effect. Meanwhile, at the Heritage Preservation Alliance headquarters, Charles Whitmore watched multiple screens displaying live feeds from Arlington and social media metrics. "The narrative is spreading exactly as planned," his assistant reported. "Our hashtags are trending nationally. Traditional media is picking up our talking points about preserving military traditions." Whitmore nodded, but his attention was drawn to a secure message from Senator Winchester. "Barrett's performance is too obvious. Need to accelerate Phase 2. Our sources say Thompson won't break easily." In the adjacent room, a team of social media specialists coordinated their next move. Doctored photos began circulating online, Thompson appearing to show disrespect during ceremonies, Thompson at radical political rallies he'd never attended, Thompson's wife at protests she'd never been. Each image was crafted to paint a picture of a political activist rather than a dedicated soldier. Back at Arlington, Rodriguez noticed a change in the crowd's behavior. Small groups were breaking off, positioning themselves at strategic points around the cemetery grounds. Some carried cameras, others had notebooks, all watching Thompson's every move. "They're documenting everything," Rodriguez reported through his radio, "looking for any mistake, any deviation from protocol they can use." Captain Rivera was already aware. His intelligence background helped him recognize a sophisticated surveillance operation when he saw one. He'd stationed plainclothes MPs throughout the grounds, but they could only watch and report. The tension peaked when a group of protesters began walking between the graves, headed toward Thompson's post. They carried American flags and sang patriotic songs, making it difficult for security to intervene without creating exactly the kind of confrontational footage the Heritage Preservation Alliance wanted. "Let them come," Thompson said quietly into his radio. "I won't break protocol." As the group approached, they formed a semicircle just beyond the restricted area. One man stepped forward, a retired colonel based on the veteran's cap he wore. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," he called out, loud enough for nearby cameras to pick up. "We respect your service, but this position has traditions that go back generations. Do the honorable thing. Step down voluntarily." Thompson remained motionless, focused straight ahead, every movement exactly as prescribed by honor guard protocols. His silence spoke volumes, but it wasn't the response they wanted. The protesters continued their psychological warfare, rotating in shifts to maintain a constant presence. They read letters supposedly from families of the fallen, shared stories about the way things used to be, all while cameras rolled. Meanwhile, Maria Thompson received an anonymous email at work. It contained detailed information about Sophie's school schedule, followed by a simple message. "Children shouldn't have to suffer for their parents' poor choices. Consider what's best for your family." She immediately called Thompson's commanding officer, her hands shaking, but her voice steady. Within minutes, plainclothes officers were dispatched to Sophie's school, and arrangements were made to vary her pickup routine. As evening approached, the protesters finally dispersed, but the day's events had made national news. Debate shows featured panels arguing about tradition versus progress. Social media was flooded with opinions from both sides. The Heritage Preservation Alliance released a statement calling for a return to traditional standards at all military institutions. Thompson's shift ended as the sun set over Arlington. As he walked to his car, Barrett's voice carried across the parking lot. "This is just the beginning, Thompson. Every day, more people are waking up to what's happening here. How long can you stand alone?" But Thompson wasn't alone. As he drove home, he passed small groups holding candlelight vigils in support of him. Online, veterans were sharing stories of how seeing him at his post inspired their own children to dream of military service. His phone contained messages of support from fellow guards across the country. The war for Arlington's soul was escalating, but Thompson had faced worse odds in combat. As he pulled into his driveway, he saw Maria and Sophie waiting at the door, and he knew exactly what he was fighting for. Captain Rivera sat in his dimly lit office well past midnight, surrounded by monitors displaying surveillance footage, financial records, and intelligence reports. A pattern was emerging, one that went far beyond Barrett and the Heritage Preservation Alliance. The attack on Thompson was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. "Sir," Lieutenant Chen entered with a fresh stack of documents. "You need to see this. We've traced the money behind the protests. It's not just coming from Barrett's organization." Rivera spread the documents across his desk. Shell companies, offshore accounts, private security firms staffed by former military personnel. The operation targeting Thompson had a budget in the millions, but one name kept appearing in the background: Aegis Foundation. "What do we know about Aegis?" Rivera asked, studying a complex web of financial transactions. "On paper, they're a think tank focused on military tradition and values," Chen replied. "But their real operations are buried deep. They've got connections to defense contractors, private military companies, even some foreign interests." A knock at the door interrupted them. Rodriguez entered, still in his honor guard uniform after a late shift. "Captain, something's happening. Barrett just made a midnight visit to Senator Winchester's private estate. Our surveillance team caught this." He placed a laptop on Rivera's desk, playing footage of Barrett entering the senator's study. Thanks to advanced surveillance tech, they could see through the window. Barrett was agitated, gesturing wildly, while Winchester remained calm, almost amused. "Get me audio," Rivera ordered. Chen typed rapidly, enhancing the surveillance feed. The men's voices became clear through sophisticated directional microphones. "They're not breaking," Barrett was saying. "Thompson's stronger than we anticipated. We need to move to more aggressive measures." Winchester's response was chilling. "Patience, Richard. The Heritage Preservation Alliance is just the public face. Aegis has invested too much in Operation Restore to rush things. Thompson is just the beginning. We're rewriting the future of America's military institutions." The revelation hit Rivera hard. This wasn't just about one Black Honor Guard member. Thompson was a test case for something much bigger. He immediately called Thompson, who arrived 20 minutes later with Maria. They needed to understand what they were really fighting against. "The Heritage Preservation Alliance is a smokescreen," Rivera explained, showing them the evidence. "They're the visible tip of the iceberg. Below the surface, there's a network of organizations working to systematically roll back decades of military integration and progress." Maria studied the financial documents, her medical training helping her spot patterns. "These shell companies, some of them are connected to hospital boards across the country. They're not just targeting the military, are they?" "No," Rivera confirmed. "Military institutions are just the start. They want to set precedents they can use in other sectors: healthcare, education, law enforcement. They chose Thompson because the Honor Guard's traditions give them a convenient excuse." Thompson absorbed the information silently, his military training kicking in. Assess the threat, identify vulnerabilities, plan countermeasures. "They're not just attacking me," he finally said. "They're attacking everything we've built, everything we stand for." A notification pinged on Chen's computer. "Sir, we've got movement. Multiple vehicles leaving the senator's estate. Barrett's heading somewhere else." They tracked Barrett's car to an exclusive country club outside the city. Despite the late hour, lights blazed in a private meeting room. Through surveillance, they observed a gathering of powerful figures: CEOs, retired generals, media executives. "That's the real leadership," Rivera explained. "The Aegis Foundation's inner circle. Barrett's just their public tool. They're the ones coordinating everything: the protests, the media campaign, the psychological operations." As they watched, a distinguished-looking man took center stage. Admiral James Harrison, retired, former commander of multiple carrier groups. "Our sources tell me Thompson remains unshaken," his voice came through clearly. "Time to show him, and everyone else, what happens to those who don't respect tradition." The implications were clear. The network was larger and more powerful than they'd imagined, with resources and influence reaching into every corner of society. They weren't just fighting Barrett or the Heritage Preservation Alliance. They were up against an organization dedicated to reversing social progress through any means necessary. "What's our next move?" Maria asked, her voice steady despite the weight of the revelation. Rivera pulled out another file. "We've got some allies they don't know about. People inside their organization who don't agree with their methods. And we've been building our own network. Civil rights organizations, veteran groups, active duty personnel who understand what's really at stake." Thompson nodded, his resolve strengthening. "They want to make me the face of this fight? Fine. But they'll learn that standing watch at Arlington taught me more than just ceremony. It taught me that some things are worth any sacrifice to protect." As they left Rivera's office, the first rays of dawn were breaking over Arlington. Another day of challenges lay ahead. But now they understood the true scope of their battle. This wasn't just about one man's right to serve with dignity. It was about the soul of every institution that had ever opened its doors to those previously excluded. Thompson had one more question before heading to his post. "Captain, why did they choose now to make their move?" Rivera's answer was sobering. "Because they're afraid, David. Every time someone like you succeeds, every time barriers fall, their power slips a little more. Fear makes them dangerous, but it also makes them vulnerable. Remember that in the days ahead." The morning of Arlington's annual Memorial Day ceremony dawned clear and cool. Thousands of visitors were expected, including high-ranking military officials and political figures. Thompson stood at his post, aware that today would be different. Intelligence suggested the Aegis Foundation planned to make a statement, but no one knew exactly what form it would take. Security was tight, with plainclothes officers mixed throughout the crowd. Captain Rivera had positioned additional guards at key points, while Lieutenant Chen monitored surveillance feeds from a mobile command center. Even Rodriguez, normally stationed at the opposite end of the grounds, had been moved closer to provide backup if needed. The first sign of trouble came when multiple tour buses arrived simultaneously at different entrances. Groups claiming to be veterans organizations, Chen reported through the radio. "But their credentials don't match our database." From his post, Thompson watched as people from the buses spread throughout the grounds, many carrying small American flags. They looked ordinary enough, middle-aged men and women in respectful attire, but their movements were too coordinated, too precise. "They're boxing us in," Rodriguez observed quietly. "Creating a perimeter." Before Rivera could respond, a familiar figure approached the podium set up for the ceremony. Richard Barrett, wearing a tailored suit and a veteran's pin he hadn't earned, began speaking into the microphone without authorization. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed across the grounds, "I apologize for this interruption, but some truths must be spoken. Today, we witness how political correctness has infected even our most sacred institutions." Security moved to stop him, but suddenly dozens of people from the crowd surrounded the podium, linking arms. More groups emerged, blocking key pathways between the graves. The coordination was impressive and alarming. "Look at your honor guard," Barrett continued, pointing at Thompson. "Look how they've twisted our traditions to serve their agenda. But today, we take back what's ours. Today, we restore honor." As if on cue, multiple smoke canisters activated throughout the crowd. Red and blue smoke began filling the air, creating chaos and confusion. Visitors panicked, unsure if they were under attack. Through the smoke, Thompson could see figures moving with military precision, their intentions unclear but threatening. "Hold your positions," Rivera ordered through the radio. "Do not break protocol unless directly threatened. MPD SWAT is en route." Thompson maintained his stance even as smoke swirled around him. Through the haze, he saw Barrett approaching, flanked by men in dark suits. This time, the businessman's face showed no pretense of civility. "Still standing at attention, Thompson?" Barrett sneered. "Still playing soldier? Let's see how long that lasts." He nodded to his companions, who began advancing toward Thompson's position. Suddenly, Maria's voice cut through Thompson's earpiece. She wasn't supposed to be on this channel. "David, Sophie's school just called. Men claiming to be federal agents tried to pick her up. The school followed our security protocol. She's safe, but..." Thompson's heart raced, but his exterior remained calm. They were attacking on multiple fronts: the ceremony, his family, his position. Everything he held dear was under threat, Yet he knew breaking protocol was exactly what they wanted. Through the smoke, he heard Barrett laugh. Shocked? We told you this was bigger than you. Your daughter's safe, for now. But think about her future, Thompson. Think about what your stubbornness might cost her. The crowd's confusion was turning to anger. Some visitors, realizing they were being used as props in a political stunt, began confronting Barrett's people. Others filmed everything on their phones, broadcasting the chaos live across social media. Sir, Rodriguez's voice was tight with concern. They're not just here to disrupt. Look at their hands. Thompson noticed it too. Several of Barrett's men had their hands inside their jackets, suggesting concealed weapons. This wasn't just a protest. It was an armed intimidation attempt on sacred ground. Captain Rivera's voice came through clearly. All units be advised. MPD confirms unauthorized vehicles approaching all gates. Possible armed individuals. Protect the civilians. The smoke was starting to clear, but the tension was reaching a breaking point. Barrett's men had nearly reached Thompson's position. Visitors were caught between fear and fury, some fleeing, others standing their ground against the provocateurs. Last chance, Thompson, Barrett called out. Step down now, walk away with dignity, or we show everyone what happens to those who disrespect tradition. Thompson remained motionless, his mind racing through combat scenarios from his Marine days. He could take down Barrett and at least 2 of his men before they could react, but that would give them exactly what they wanted. Violence at Arlington, a Black Honor Guard member breaking protocol. Instead, Thompson did something unexpected. He began reciting the Sentinels' creed, his voice carrying across the now hushed grounds. My dedication to this sacred duty is total and wholehearted. Other Honor Guard members joined in, their voices growing stronger. In the responsibility bestowed on me, never will I falter. The effect was powerful. Visitors, recognizing the creed, began recording this instead of the chaos. Barrett's face contorted with rage as his theatrical takeover was being overshadowed by a simple demonstration of dedication and duty. Take him down, Barrett ordered, losing control. But as his men moved forward, multiple SWAT teams emerged from behind monuments, weapons trained on the attackers. The coordinated response caught Barrett's group completely off guard. Federal agents, on the ground. The command rang out as law enforcement swarmed the area. Barrett's men, realizing their plan had failed, surrendered rather than risk a firefight on hallowed ground. Barrett himself stood frozen, his carefully orchestrated demonstration collapsing around him. But Thompson knew this was just one battle in a longer war. Somewhere, in a secured location, the real leaders of Aegis were already planning their next move. The aftermath of the Memorial Day incident transformed Arlington's visitor center into an impromptu command post. FBI agents interviewed witnesses while cybersecurity experts analyzed footage from dozens of phones. Captain Rivera stood before a wall of screens, each showing different angles of the morning's events. Facial recognition has identified most of Barrett's team, Lieutenant Chen reported, pulling up profiles on her tablet. Former military, mostly special operations, all connected to private security firms contracted by Aegis Foundation shell companies. Thompson sat nearby, still in his honor guard uniform, watching the playback of Barrett's men approaching his position. Their movements, their positioning, it was all too familiar. They weren't trying to remove me, he realized. They wanted me to fight back. Everything was staged to provoke a violent response. And when you didn't give them one, they went after Sophie, Maria added, her voice tight with controlled anger. She'd arrived as soon as the school confirmed their daughter was safe. The men who tried to take her, their credentials looked real. They knew our security protocols. Rivera nodded grimly. Aegis has connections in federal law enforcement. They could have accessed that information through multiple channels. He turned to a new screen showing surveillance photos. But they made mistakes, got sloppy when Thompson's response threw them off script. The photos revealed hurried meetings between Barrett and other figures after the smoke bombs went off. One image caught Barrett on the phone, his face contorted with fury. Tech experts had already traced the call to a private estate in Virginia's horse country. That's Harrison's compound, Rivera explained, referring to Admiral James Harrison, the retired naval commander they'd identified as one of Aegis's leaders. Barrett was receiving direct orders during the operation. An FBI agent approached with a new report. "We've got Barrett in custody, but he's not talking. His lawyers are already here, high-powered firm with connections to Senator Winchester's office." Thompson studied the footage again, something nagging at his tactical instincts. The smoke bombs, the positioning of their teams. They had backup plans we didn't see. What were they really preparing for? Lieutenant Chen's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up infrared scans from security drones. The images showed heat signatures of multiple vehicles idling just outside Arlington's perimeter during the incident. 3 unmarked vans, she reported. They left as soon as SWAT arrived. "More teams," Thompson said. "If I had fought back, if there had been violence, those vans would have moved in. They were ready to escalate this into something much bigger." Maria's medical training helped her connect the dots. "A riot," she said quietly. They were prepared to turn Arlington into a battlefield. The smoke, the chaos, it was all staged to look like Thompson incited violence on hallowed ground. Rivera's phone buzzed with a secure message. His expression darkened as he read it. "Harrison just called an emergency meeting at the Aegis Foundation. Our source inside says they're accelerating something called protocol restoration." Before they could discuss this new development, Thompson's phone lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number. He put it on speaker, and a digitally altered voice filled the room. "Impressive performance, Staff Sergeant. You're proving to be a more worthy opponent than expected. But ask yourself, how long can you protect everything you care about? Your family, your post, the very institution you serve?" Thompson's voice remained steady. "Who is this?" "Someone who understands what's really at stake. Barrett, the Heritage Alliance, they're just tools. We're fighting for the soul of every institution that defines America. You're just one battle in a longer war." The call ended abruptly. Tech teams immediately began tracing it, but Thompson already knew they wouldn't find anything. These people were too careful, too well-resourced. "They're changing tactics," Rivera observed. "The public spectacle failed, so they'll try something more subtle, more dangerous." Maria's phone chimed with a news alert. A conservative media outlet was running a story questioning Thompson's combat record, citing anonymous military sources. Social media was already amplifying the allegations. "Character assassination," Rodriguez said from the doorway, having just finished his shift. "They'll try to destroy his reputation since they couldn't provoke him into violence." Thompson stood, his decision made. "Then we take the fight to them. They want to question my record, my dedication? Fine. But they're not the only ones who can investigate and expose the truth." Rivera nodded, understanding the shift in strategy. "We've got support they don't know about. People inside their organization who are willing to talk. Evidence of their real plans." "This isn't just about me anymore," Thompson said, looking at the footage still playing on the screens. "Every time they attack, every lie they spread, they're attacking everything Arlington represents. Everything every soldier on these grounds died to protect." Maria took his hand, her grip firm and supportive. "Then we show everyone what they're really fighting against. Not just you, but the principles you stand for." As if to underscore the stakes, another alert came through. Aegis Foundation had just announced a major press conference for the following day. Admiral Harrison would be speaking about preserving military traditions and protecting sacred institutions. "They're not backing down," Thompson observed. "They're doubling down." "Neither are we," Rivera replied, already coordinating with federal agencies. "They wanted a war. Let's give them one. Just not the kind they expected." As night fell over Arlington, Thompson returned to his post. The grounds were quiet now, but he could feel the tension building. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attacks. But he'd faced worse odds in combat, and this time, he wasn't fighting alone. The Aegis Foundation's press conference was held at the prestigious Metropolitan Club, its marble columns and crystal chandeliers providing a carefully chosen backdrop of tradition and power. Admiral Harrison stood at the podium, his military decorations gleaming under the camera lights, while reporters filled the ornate ballroom. Today, "We face a crisis of identity in our armed forces," Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. "Political correctness and social engineering threaten the very traditions that made our military great." Thompson watched the broadcast from Captain Rivera's office, noting the strategic placement of uniformed veterans behind Harrison. The message was clear. They claimed to speak for military tradition. But Rivera's team was ready. As Harrison continued his speech, Lieutenant Chen activated their countermeasure. Suddenly, every reporter's phone buzzed simultaneously with an anonymous tip. Documents showing Aegis Foundation's connection to extremist groups, financial records revealing payments to provocateurs, and surveillance photos of Barrett meeting with known hate group leaders. Harrison faltered slightly as reporters began looking at their phones instead of him. Questions started coming that weren't in the planned script. "Admiral, can you comment on Aegis Foundation's payments to extremist organizations? What about the coordinated attack on Arlington's Memorial Day ceremony? Is it true your organization attempted to kidnap Staff Sergeant Thompson's daughter?" Before Harrison could respond, the doors burst open. FBI agents entered, carrying search warrants for the Aegis Foundation's offices. The timing was perfect. While Harrison was occupied with the press conference, federal agents were seizing documents and hard drives from multiple Aegis locations. But the opposition had prepared for this possibility. As Thompson and Rivera watched, Harrison smiled coldly and produced his own documents. "Since you mentioned Staff Sergeant Thompson," he said smoothly, "perhaps we should discuss these." He held up what appeared to be military records. "Our investigation has uncovered disturbing irregularities in Thompson's service history. Questions about his combat decorations, inconsistencies in his honor guard selection." Maria, who had joined them in Rivera's office, grabbed Thompson's arm. "They're falsifying your records," she said, her voice tight with anger. "They must have someone inside the military record system." Thompson's phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Your daughter's quite talented at piano. Her recital next week at the community center should be interesting." The threat was clear. They were watching Sophie, knowing exactly where she would be, demonstrating their reach into every aspect of their lives. Rivera immediately called Sophie's school, initiating emergency protection protocols. But the psychological damage was done. They wanted the Thompsons to know nowhere was truly safe. "We need to move you to a secure location," Rivera said, already making arrangements. "All of you." Thompson shook his head. "That's what they want, to drive us into hiding, make it look like we have something to fear, something to hide." On the TV, Harrison was still speaking, laying out a carefully constructed narrative of declining standards and compromised traditions. But Thompson noticed something in the Admiral's expression when he mentioned combat decorations, a tell that any poker player would recognize. "He knows those records are fake," Thompson said. "Look at his face when he talks about my service history. He's worried the forgery won't hold up to serious scrutiny." Lieutenant Chen was already diving deep into the military database, tracing recent access attempts. "Got it," she said after several tense minutes. "Someone accessed your records last night using high-level credentials, but they left traces. Whoever did this was rushed, sloppy." Maria's phone chimed with another alert. The hospital where she worked was receiving anonymous complaints about her professional conduct. Simultaneously, Thompson's fellow honor guard members reported similar attacks. Their families, their careers, all under coordinated assault. "They're not just targeting us anymore," Thompson realized. "They're going after everyone who stands with us, trying to isolate us." Rivera's secure line rang. Their source inside Aegis was calling with urgent news. The agent put it on speaker. "Harrison's documents are just the start. They're planning something at Arlington tonight. Multiple teams, heavy equipment. They keep mentioning something about permanent changes to the guard rotation." Thompson and Rivera shared a look, understanding the implications. They weren't just planning to remove Thompson. They intended to physically prevent any future honor guards who didn't fit their ideal from taking the post. "They'll have to breach Arlington security," Rivera said. "Even with their connections, they can't." "Unless they have help from inside," Thompson interrupted. "We've assumed we're dealing with an external threat. But what if they have people in Arlington's administration, in the Guard itself? The possibility hung heavy in the air. If Aegis had infiltrated the Honor Guard's command structure, nowhere was truly secure. Maria stood, her medical training kicking in. Assess the threat, plan treatment, take action. So we fight on every front. I'll handle the hospital allegations. Lieutenant Chen can trace the records breach. Captain Rivera coordinates with federal agencies. And David? I stand my post, Thompson finished. No matter what comes. As if in response to his determination, every screen in Rivera's office suddenly flickered. When they came back on, they showed the same image. Surveillance photos of Thompson's entire family, friends and supporters going about their daily lives. A message appeared below. Everyone has weak points. Everyone can be broken. Thompson stood, straightening his uniform. They're wrong, he said quietly. Real strength isn't about breaking others. It's about standing firm when others try to break you. The sun was setting over Arlington as Thompson walked back to his post. Behind him, Rivera's team mobilized to protect his family and expose the conspiracy. Ahead, the sacred grounds he had sworn to guard waited, and somewhere in the gathering darkness, Aegis's forces were preparing their next move. Tonight would test everything: his training, his dedication, his belief in the principles he had sworn to uphold. But as Thompson took his position, his bearing perfect despite everything, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would not break. Night fell over Arlington as Thompson maintained his watch, the cemetery grounds eerily quiet except for the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. Security teams were hidden throughout the area, waiting for Aegis's promised operation. But the real breakthrough was happening elsewhere. Lieutenant Chen burst into Rivera's command center, her typically composed demeanor shaken. Sir, you need to see this. We've cracked their encryption. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up documents on the main screen. Aegis isn't just an organization. It's a network of networks. And Admiral Harrison? He's not the real leader. Rivera leaned forward, studying the complex web of connections now revealed. Shell companies, private military contractors, dark money flowing through offshore accounts, all leading back to one name: General Maxwell Crawford, former Joint Chiefs member, now believed to be in quiet retirement. Crawford was forced out 5 years ago, Rivera explained to Thompson over the secure line. Officially, he retired. Unofficially, he opposed every diversity initiative, every barrier broken, every change to tradition. But he didn't leave. He went underground. The documents showed Crawford had spent those years building Aegis, recruiting wealthy donors and disgruntled former officers. Barrett, Harrison, even Senator Winchester. They were all just pieces in Crawford's larger game. It's not just about the military, Chen added, scrolling through more files. They're targeting every institution that's become more inclusive. Police departments, federal agencies, corporate boards. They want to roll back decades of progress, and they're using Thompson as a test case. Suddenly, the screens flickered, and a new message appeared. Watching us watch you. Impressive work, Lieutenant, but you're too late. Before anyone could react, alarms blared throughout Arlington. Multiple security breaches at different points around the cemetery. But something was wrong. The response teams weren't mobilizing. Our communications are down, Rodriguez reported through his backup radio. Security systems are compromised. Someone's locked us out of our own network. Thompson's training kicked in as he spotted movement in the shadows, figures moving with military precision between the graves. Through his earpiece, he heard a familiar voice, General Crawford himself. Stand down, Staff Sergeant Thompson. Crawford's voice was calm, almost paternal. You've served your purpose. The nation has seen what happens when we abandon our traditions. Now it's time to restore order. Thompson remained at his post as multiple teams converged on his position. But these weren't just private security. They wore official military police uniforms and carried valid credentials. They've got people inside the chain of command, Rivera realized, watching helplessly from his office. They're making this look like an official action. Crawford emerged from the darkness, his former Joint Chief's uniform immaculate, medals gleaming in the moonlight. Behind him, Admiral Harrison and Richard Barrett looked on with satisfaction. "You see, Thompson," Crawford continued, "you were never the real target. You were the catalyst, the example we needed to show why standards must be maintained, why tradition must be preserved. Your dignity, your composure, it actually helped our cause. You showed everyone what happens when merit is sacrificed for diversity." Thompson's voice carried clearly through the night air. "Is that what you really believe, General? Or is it just what you tell yourself to justify betraying everything that uniform stands for?" Crawford's face hardened. "I've given 50 years to this country's service. I've watched political correctness and social engineering weaken our institutions. Today, we begin reversing that damage." But Crawford had made a critical mistake. In his moment of perceived triumph, he'd revealed himself, and Rivera's team had recorded everything. Lieutenant Chen's fingers flew across her keyboard, bypassing Aegis's network control. Suddenly, every screen in Arlington's visitor center, every military computer in the region, began broadcasting Crawford's words along with the encrypted files showing Aegis's true nature. His manifesto, his plans, his betrayal of his oath, all exposed. "Sir," one of Crawford's men interrupted urgently, "we've got incoming. Multiple federal agencies, all access points." Crawford's composure cracked as he realized his careful plans were unraveling. The evidence was irrefutable: conspiracy, sedition, attempts to subvert military command. Even his allies in Congress couldn't shield him from this. "It's over, General," Thompson said quietly. "Arlington isn't yours to restore. It belongs to every American who ever served, regardless of their race, gender, or background." FBI teams were moving in, led by agents who had been building this case for months. Senator Winchester was already being taken into custody at his home. Admiral Harrison's face showed the dawning realization that their entire network was being dismantled. "You don't understand," Crawford said, his voice rising. "We were protecting something greater than any individual, the very fabric of military tradition." "No, sir," Thompson interrupted, still maintaining his post. "You betrayed those traditions. Every soldier buried here died protecting our ability to grow, to change, to become better. Their sacrifice wasn't to preserve the past. It was to secure a future where every American can serve with dignity." As federal agents surrounded Crawford and his conspirators, Thompson remained at attention, honoring his duty just as he had since his first day. The night's chaos faded as dawn approached, but the impact of these events would resonate far beyond Arlington's gates. Maria arrived with Captain Rivera just as the sun began to rise. They watched as Crawford was led away, his brilliant career ending in handcuffs and disgrace. "It's not really over, is it?" Maria asked softly. "There will be others." Thompson nodded slightly. "There will always be those who resist progress, who fear change. Our job isn't to defeat them all. It's to stand firm, to show that dignity and duty aren't bound by color or creed." The morning sun cast long shadows across Arlington's endless rows of white marble headstones, each one marking a soldier who had helped write America's continuing story of progress. Thompson stood among them, his posture perfect, his dedication unwavering, living proof that their sacrifice had not been in vain. The morning after Crawford's arrest brought no peace. Instead, Arlington National Cemetery faced its greatest crisis yet. As federal agents processed evidence from the night's operations, an urgent alert came through to Captain Rivera's command center. Multiple explosive devices detected throughout the grounds, Lieutenant Chen reported, her screens showing heat signatures at key points around Arlington. "They must have planted them during the confusion last night." Thompson's voice came through the radio, calm despite the situation. General Crawford's insurance policy. He knew he might fail. Rivera mobilized bomb disposal units, but the devices were sophisticated, military-grade explosives with multiple triggering mechanisms. Worse, they were positioned near historic monuments and prominent grave sites. Any mistake could damage irreplaceable pieces of American history. "Sir," Chen interrupted, "incoming video call." It's routing through multiple servers, but it's Crawford. From custody. The general's face appeared on the main screen, still wearing his uniform despite being in a federal holding facility. Captain Rivera, Staff Sergeant Thompson, he began, his voice steady. By now you've found our parting gifts. Consider them a demonstration of what happens when you dismantle traditions too quickly. Thompson, watching from his post, noticed something in Crawford's bearing, a subtle tell he recognized from combat. He's not threatening to destroy Arlington, Thompson realized. He's offering a trade. Crawford smiled coldly. Perceptive as always, Staff Sergeant. Here are my terms. A full pardon for myself and my key associates, reinstatement of traditional selection standards for the honor guard, and your resignation effective immediately. You're in federal custody, Rivera countered. You're in no position to make demands. Am I? Crawford's smile widened. The explosives are just phase 1. Right now, dozens of my supporters in key military positions are preparing to release classified documents. Real ones, not forgeries. Documents that would shake public faith in every military institution. The resulting chaos would make my arrest look trivial. Maria, who had been helping coordinate with hospital trauma teams as a precaution, saw Thompson's expression change. David, what is it? The documents, Thompson said quietly. They're not about military secrets. They're about people like me. Every minority service member who broke barriers, who faced resistance. Crawford's people have been collecting dirt, waiting for this moment. Correct again, Crawford confirmed. Every diversity candidate who ever made a mistake, every accommodation that bent the rules, every standard that was adjusted, all of it carefully documented, ready to prove our point about the cost of change. The impact would be devastating. Even if most of the documents showed only minor infractions, the coordinated release would create a firestorm. Every minority service member would face renewed scrutiny, renewed suspicion. You'd destroy the careers of thousands of innocent soldiers, Rivera said, disgust evident in his voice. All to preserve your version of tradition? I'd restore faith in the system, Crawford corrected. Sometimes a soldier must sacrifice others to win the larger war. You have 1 hour to meet my terms. After that, both the explosives and the documents go live. The screen went dark, leaving them with an impossible choice. Thompson's resignation and the restoration of traditional standards would set progress back decades, but refusing meant risking both Arlington's monuments and the reputation of countless service members. We could evacuate the grounds, Chen suggested. Try to disarm the devices. Not enough time, Rivera replied. And even if we managed it, the document release would still cause incalculable damage. Thompson stood silent for a moment, then spoke with quiet authority. Lieutenant Chen, can you trace Crawford's video call? Already did, she replied. He's at the Federal Detention Center downtown, but he's not alone. The signal's being routed through multiple devices in the facility. He has help inside, Thompson concluded. People willing to smuggle in communications equipment, coordinate with outside supporters, which means they're vulnerable, Rivera finished, catching Thompson's thinking. Chen, get me everything on the detention center's staff. Anyone with military connections, anyone who's ever expressed sympathy with Crawford's views. The next 45 minutes were a blur of activity. While bomb disposal teams carefully studied the devices, Rivera's intelligence team worked to identify Crawford's inside support network. Thompson, meanwhile, maintained his post, a visible reminder of what they were fighting to protect. With 15 minutes remaining, they had their breakthrough. Chen found a pattern. 3 guards, all former military, all with connections to Aegis front companies. They've been on duty for every one of Crawford's video communications. That's our window, Rivera said. If we can cut off Crawford's communication with his outside supporters. The explosives can't be triggered, Thompson finished, and the document release can't be coordinated. Federal agents moved swiftly, isolating and arresting the compromised guards. Crawford, suddenly cut off from his network, found himself truly alone. But they weren't finished. Thompson had one more card to play. Through his military contacts, he had quietly reached out to other minority service members named in Crawford's documents. Instead of hiding from exposure, they chose to step forward. As Crawford's deadline approached, Hundreds of service members went public with their stories. Stories of breaking barriers, facing discrimination, overcoming prejudice, all while serving with honor. The very weapons Crawford would have used against them became testimony to their strength. "Time's up," Crawford's voice came through one final time, now desperate and angry. "You've made your choice. Now watch as—" But nothing happened. His network was broken, his dead man switches neutralized. The documents he would have leaked were already being shared, not as scandal but as proof of progress. Thompson remained at his post as federal agents led the compromised guards away. The bomb disposal teams were systematically disarming the devices, and across social media, #sign Stand With Honor was trending as service members and civilians alike shared messages of support. The crisis wasn't over. There would still be devices to disarm, networks to dismantle, wounds to heal. But in choosing to stand firm rather than submit to blackmail, Thompson and his allies had demonstrated the true meaning of honor. In the weeks following Crawford's failed attempt at blackmail, Arlington National Cemetery gradually returned to its solemn routine. The bomb disposal teams had cleared the last device, and enhanced security measures were in place. But the impact of recent events continued to ripple through military and civilian institutions alike. Thompson stood at his post, watching the morning sun cast long shadows across the endless rows of white marble headstones. A young boy approached with his mother, pointing at Thompson's immaculate uniform. "Are you the soldier from the news?" the boy asked. "The one who didn't let the bad guys win?" Thompson maintained his ceremonial stance, but his eyes met the boy's. The child was wearing a junior ROTC t-shirt, his expression full of hope and admiration. "Kevin," his mother said softly, "remember what we learned about the honor guard? They maintained silence during their watch." But Thompson broke protocol, just for a moment. "The bad guys don't win," he said quietly, "when good people stand together." Then he resumed his post, his bearing perfect as always. In Captain Rivera's office, the aftermath was still unfolding. Lieutenant Chen's screens showed news coverage of the ongoing investigations. Crawford and his key associates faced multiple federal charges. The Heritage Preservation Alliance was being dismantled, its assets frozen. Senator Winchester had resigned in disgrace. "The network's broken," Rivera reported during their evening briefing. "But more importantly, their ideology is being exposed. Every institution they tried to control is now examining its own biases, its own resistance to change." Maria, who had taken a leadership role in coordinating support for affected military families, shared her own updates. The service members Crawford tried to blackmail? They're being hailed as pioneers. Their stories are inspiring a new generation to serve, to break barriers. Rodriguez, now promoted to head of Honor Guard training, added his perspective. Applications for Honor Guard service have tripled, especially from minority candidates. They're calling it the Thompson effect, people seeing that they can serve with dignity no matter who tries to stop them. But Thompson knew the fight wasn't completely over. As he walked home that evening, he passed a newspaper stand. The headline read, "Military Traditions versus Modern Progress. The debate continues." Some would always resist change, would always try to preserve their version of tradition. At home, Sophie was practicing piano, preparing for her rescheduled recital. The previous one had been canceled during the crisis, but now she would perform with extra security present, a reminder that vigilance was still necessary. "Daddy," she called out as he entered, "my teacher says I should play the service songs for each military branch, to honor everyone who helps protect us." Thompson smiled, remembering his own childhood dreams of service. "That's a wonderful idea, honey. Every note honors their sacrifice." Maria embraced him, their moment of peace interrupted by his phone buzzing. It was a message from Rivera. "Turn on the news." The television showed Admiral Harrison, now cooperating with federal investigators, testifying before Congress. "We were wrong," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "We claimed to protect traditions, but we really feared losing power. Staff Sergeant Thompson showed us what real military tradition looks like, serving with honor, regardless of who you are." Later that night, Thompson received another message, this one from an anonymous veteran. "My granddaughter dreams of joining the Honor Guard. Thanks to you, she knows it's possible. The next morning, as Thompson prepared for his shift, he reflected on everything that had happened. The initial attack by Barrett seemed almost trivial now, compared to what it had revealed. But that moment of hatred had exposed something larger, both the worst and the best of America's ongoing struggle with change. At Arlington's gates, visitors were returning in record numbers. Many came to pay respects to the fallen, but others came to witness something special. The changing of the guard, where Thompson and his fellow sentinels demonstrated the true meaning of honor. Captain Rivera met Thompson before his shift. Crawford's allies are still out there, he warned. Some still hold positions of influence. The fight for progress never really ends. No, Thompson agreed, adjusting his uniform. But neither does the guard. Every step we take, every watch we stand, it shows them that dignity can't be broken by hate. As Thompson took his post, he saw Rodriguez training a new group of honor guard candidates. They were diverse in every way, gender, race, background, but united in their commitment to serve. Each had their own story of overcoming barriers. Each carried their own dreams of making a difference. The morning sun gleamed off Thompson's medals as he began his measured pacing. Behind him stood the endless rows of headstones, each marking a soldier who had helped write America's continuing story. Before him stretched a future where every American could serve with dignity, where tradition meant honoring principles rather than prejudices. A light breeze carried the sound of Sophie's piano practice from a nearby community center, the service songs she would play at her recital. The notes drifted across Arlington's sacred ground, a reminder that the next generation would build on what was protected today. Thompson maintained his watch, his bearing perfect, his dedication unwavering. He had faced hatred with dignity, confronted power with principle, and showed that one person standing firm could inspire others to stand together. The guard would continue, the watch would endure, and the promise of progress would be preserved, one step at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.